This is Sam Young, a former Mormon bishop who's helping to change policy in the Mormon Church. In order to know why he's calling for a change, it's important to understand what's wrong with the current policy. In the current policy, local bishops take children behind closed doors and ask them invasive sexual questions under the heading of the law of chastity. Kids as young as 7 years old may be subject to questions about masturbation, pornography, or other sexual activities. Such interviews continue throughout the teen years, where questions become more invasive about sexual subjects under the heading of personal worthiness. To be clear, not everyone has the same experience. Some bishops choose never to pry into sexual matters. However, the open nature of the policy allows bishops to become very explicit in their questions if they choose to. These inappropriate interviews have led broadly to two types of abuse. The most familiar form is overt sexual abuse. These stories of rape and molestation began with church leaders using these private sexual interviews to groom children as victims. Still, other instances of overt abuse arise from the normalization of sexual conversation in private meetings with adults in the bishop's office, which grooms children who later encounter sexual predators without understanding the danger. The second form of abuse, covert sexual abuse, is harder to recognize, yet much more common. Covert sexual abuse happens when well-meaning but uninformed leaders use messages of shame, godly disfavor, or lost virtue or worth to demonize normal experiences of human sexual development. Like other types of psychological trauma and abuse, covert abuse affects how children value and accept themselves, and these feelings of worthlessness, self-loathing, and accompanying distortions of healthy sexual and psychological development carry over from childhood years into adulthood. The negative effects of covert abuse include depression, anxiety, self-loathing, suicide, and sexual dysfunction. These factors may impact every other aspect of the individual's life as they mature into adulthood. Readers can learn more about the scope and depth of both overt and covert abuse resulting from existing church policies by reading some of the over 600 personal stories submitted to Sam Young's website at ProtectLDSChildren.org. With a basic understanding of the nature of the problem, what sort of changes are being requested by Sam Young and others who support this movement?
One sentence, 10 words long. No one-on-one interviews. No sexually explicit questions ever.
Current policy is permissive in nature, informing bishops what they can do or should do. As judges in Israel, there is broad allowance for a bishop to ask any questions or hold any interview in any way that they want, so long as they claim they were inspired to do so. These 10 words are important because they are restrictive in nature. That is, they inform bishops what they are not allowed to do. They draw strict boundaries, keeping children and leaders safe from compromising situations or inflicting unintentional harm. In March 2018, after collecting over 50,000 signatures in a petition calling for change, Sam Young and hundreds of other supporters marched on church headquarters in Salt Lake City. There, they delivered a bound book of stories of abuse as a result of this church policy to each of the apostles and First Presidency. In the lead up to this march, the church responded to this media attention by issuing a policy update. The new policy allowed children to request another adult be in the room during interviews. However, the policy continued to allow one-on-one private interviews by default, as well as sexual questioning of children. Since policy continued to allow private interrogations about sexual matters with children, Sam Young and others continued to call for change. Collecting more signatures and more survivors of abuse added their stories to the Protect LDS Children website in anticipation of further action. In June, the church issued a second response and update to policy, stating that bishops should use temple recommend questions in interviews with youth. This includes asking children about their adherence to the law of chastity, opening the door to further detailed and explicit conversations about sexual matters in interviews. Additionally, the June policy recommended that bishops use the standards curriculum called For the Strength of Youth to guide discussions with children in interviews. This curriculum includes categorizing masturbation as sexual sin, which is tantamount to murder, disqualifying an offender from the Spirit of God. These concepts are the foundation of covert sexual abuse. In the face of ineffective policy changes that do not address the core problems, in July 2018, Sam Young announced a hunger strike to raise awareness of the issue and press for meaningful change. Abstaining from all but fluids and electrolytes, Sam will stay on his hunger strike until one of three things happen. First, a top church leader announcing a substantive change in which there are no one-on-one interviews and no sexually explicit questions allowed ever. Next, if 10 sitting LDS bishops publicly announce their support for these changes to policy, or finally, if his wife, Sister Young, tells him it's time to eat. This new action prompted a resurgence of media coverage both online and on television. The church was quick to respond, and in their written response gave lip service to protecting children while defending its current policy, which allows leaders to hold private interviews on sexual subjects with children. The church then misrepresented existing policy by asserting that none of the questions are sexually explicit, while excluding the fact that the inevitable follow-up discussions about the law of chastity will be inherently sexual in nature. Finally, the church portrayed Sam Young as a troublemaker who has obstructed missionary efforts, incited contention, and refused to follow established procedures in the church. Sam has reserved a seat and invited each of the 15 top leaders to visit with him and survivors of abuse in the church during his fast. So far, none have accepted. In the end, it doesn't really matter whether or not you see Sam as good or bad. What really matters is how the church decides to deal with the reality of the harmful effects of its current policies. Other institutions have been compelled to correct similar harmful policies once the extent of abuse and harm was uncovered by courts or journalists. The Mormon Church has the opportunity to be proactive and do the right thing now before more children are sacrificed at the altar of ecclesiastical pride and entrenchment. You can make a difference by voicing your opinion and support on social media and in interactions with your fellow brothers, sisters, and leaders in the church. Support making Mormonism a safer, healthier place for children and be on the right side of history.